My family uninvited me from Christmas with a text message. It buzzed onto my phone on a Tuesday morning in late November while I was standing in line for coffee, half awake, scrolling through emails. The preview banner just said, "We've talked and decided," which, if you grew up in a family like mine, is never followed by anything good. I opened it and read, "After everything that happened last year, we really need a peaceful Christmas. We can't risk you ruining the mood again. It's probably best if you sit this one out. No dear, no love mom and dad, just that, in the family group chat, right above a photo of my sister's perfectly decorated tree. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. For a second, I honestly thought I was misreading it. Ruining the mood? They'd taken my entire existence, boiled it down to a vibe problem, and hit send like it was a casual scheduling change. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. A dozen responses flashed through my head. "Are you serious?" Or, "Wow, thanks," or, "Just say you don't like me and go." Instead, I stared at the screen, back at the line of strangers and the barista calling out names, and I remembered last Christmas. The one where my mother had pulled me into the kitchen and hissed, "You and your negativity are ruining everything," because I'd said out loud the thing everyone knew but wasn't allowed to mention: my father's drinking, my brother's gambling debt. The way the house felt like a stage set held together with tape and denial. They'd decided the problem wasn't the secrets. It was me for refusing to keep them. Now, a year later, they were putting it into policy. Ban the black sheep, save the holiday. Normally, this is the part where I would have apologized, begged, offered to be more positive, or promised to keep things light. I'd done that dance my whole life, but this time, something was different. Because for the first time ever, I was reading those words from a place my family didn't know existed. A calendar app on my phone with a big block of time over Christmas already filled in. A flight confirmation sitting in my email. An invitation I hadn't even told them about yet because I knew exactly how they'd react. I wasn't spending Christmas in their suburban living room this year. I was spending it on a private island. And the funny thing about being uninvited from someone else's version of peace is that it makes accepting your own version so much easier. They thought they were punishing me. What they didn't realize was that their text was the final permission slip I needed to stop trying to earn a spot in a room that always blamed me for its cracks. And they had no idea yet how they'd react when they saw the invite I was about to send out instead. To understand why that one text hit so hard and also felt weirdly like relief, you have to know a little about my family. My name is Leela, and in my family's story, I was always the girl who made things awkward. From the outside, we looked like a Christmas movie. My mother collected snowmen and coordinated wrapping paper. My father timed the tree lighting with the first notes of his favorite carol like it was a Broadway cue. My older brother, Mark, played the charming oldest child who always just needed a little help, but somehow ended up being the star of every dinner debate. And my younger sister, Chloe, was the Instagram version of holiday joy. Matching pajamas, perfect cookies, curated joy in swipeable squares. My job, unofficially, was to keep everyone else from falling apart. I was the one who remembered who was mad at whom and quietly steered conversations away from landmines. I made the grocery lists. I double-checked the oven timer. I sat on the floor and helped my nieces untangle toy packaging while everyone else toasted in the dining room. If a fight broke out, I was the one my mother sent to smooth things over so her centerpiece wouldn't be wasted. What nobody tells you about being the emotional janitor is that eventually you start to see the patterns nobody else wants to look at. By the time I was 18, I knew exactly how much my father could drink before the jokes turned mean. I knew when my mother's tight smile meant she'd put another charge on a credit card she swore she'd cut up. I knew that Mark had a poker night that had nothing to do with friendly games and everything to do with chasing losses. I also knew we weren't supposed to talk about any of it. Christmas is not the time for heavy conversations, my mother would say, pressing another glass into my father's hand. We just need to get through the holidays. Get through. Like joy was a test you could fail if anyone acknowledged reality. So we snarled. We took photos in front of a tree in a house edged with cracks. And every year, when those cracks widened, somehow I ended up blamed for tension because I never got good at pretending everything was fine. Last Christmas, it all snapped. It started, as these things do, with something small. My father slurred through grace. My mother laughed too loudly. Mark asked my niece to go get his wallet from the bedroom, and she came back holding 3 scratch-off tickets that fluttered out of it. Nobody moved. The air changed. My niece, being 8 and earnest, said, "Uncle Mark, Mommy said you're not allowed to buy these anymore." Silence. My sister-in-law's face went pale. My mother's mouth flattened. My father reached for his drink, and my mother turned to me. "Leela, can you take the kids to the playroom?" she asked through clenched teeth. I looked at my niece, at my sister-in-law's shaking hands, at my brother's flushed face. I looked at the Christmas tree. And for the first time, I stayed in my chair. "No," I said quietly. "The kids aren't the ones who should be leaving the room." It was like throwing a lit match into a room full of scented candles. My father snapped that I was disrespectful. Mark shouted that it wasn't a big deal. My mother hissed that I was ruining Christmas with my negativity. My sister-in-law burst into tears and fled to the bathroom. My niece slid under the table and covered her ears. All I had done was refuse to redirect. But in a family that worships denial, that was enough to make me the villain. 2 hours later, after the plates were cleared and my mother had fixed the mood with extra dessert and forced carols, she cornered me in the kitchen. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" she said. "You always have to drag everything into the light. You ruin every holiday with your drama." I opened my mouth to say that what I'd said, that maybe the problem wasn't me, but the things we kept pretending weren't problems. She cut me off. "If you can't be positive," she said, "maybe you shouldn't come next year." I thought it was an empty threat. Turns out, it was a promise. After that Christmas, I pulled back. Not in some dramatic, slam the door, never speak again way. More like someone slowly stepping off a treadmill they realize has been set to sprint for years. I stopped being the first one to text in the family chat. When my mother sent long paragraphs about party themes and shopping lists, I responded with emojis instead of offers to help. I visited less. Part of that was finances. I'm not going to lie and pretend I had some glittering, secret, rich life. I was 28, working remotely as a project manager for a tech company that paid me just enough to live in a small apartment in the city and still feel like I was barely keeping up. But the other part was choice. My boss, bless him, didn't care where I worked from as long as the work got done. So when a friend from college, Jenna, called and said, "Hey, my company is partnering on this insane new eco-resort, and they need someone obsessive with checklists to come down and babysit the chaos for a few weeks," I said yes without thinking too hard. The insane eco-resort was on a private island. Not the billionaire, gold-plated yacht kind of island. More like a chunk of rock and palm trees off the coast, a tiny airport, a handful of staff housing units, and a half-built cluster of villas overlooking clear blue water. The first time I stepped off the little prop plane, hot air wrapped around me like a hug. Everything smelled like salt and sun lotion and pine from the wooden planks that made up the skeleton of the resort. It was beautiful. It was messy. It was the opposite of my parents' house at Christmas. Nothing here was pretending to be perfect. Things were either broken and being fixed, or finished and honestly proud of it. My job was to keep track of deliveries, schedule inspections, and make sure a bunch of stubborn contractors didn't kill each other. I thrived. For 3 months, I woke up to the sound of waves instead of my upstairs neighbor's alarm. I drank coffee on a porch that looked out over water so clear it didn't seem real. I worked my tail off from sunrise to well past sunset and fell into bed exhausted in a way that felt clean instead of resentful. The resort's owner, a woman in her 40s named Elise, noticed. "You don't flinch when things go wrong," she said once, watching me calmly reorder tile after a shipment got ruined by rain. "Most people panic." I shrugged. "Chaos is kind of my default," I said. "Just nicer scenery here." She smiled. "You're good at creating order out of it," she said. "That's not normal or common." By the time the initial phase of the project wrapped, Elise and I had developed an easy rhythm. She'd bring me problems, I'd bring her spreadsheets. One evening, we sat on the deck of the main villa watching the sun melt into the horizon, and she said, "When this place is fully open, I want you back, not just as staff, as someone we trust with real decisions." "Like what?" I asked. She talked about a guest experience program, about corporate retreats, about loyalty weeks for people who helped build the place. "You'll have first pick on those," she said. "You've earned it." I laughed. "First pick on what, exactly? The week with the least complaints?" She shook her head. "On time here," she said. "Real time. You'll have access to off-season blocks other people would pay a small fortune for." I didn't tell her that my family still thought I was the one barely keeping it together, that my mother liked to remind me I couldn't even manage one nice dinner without blowing up, that somewhere in a cul-de-sac 3 time zones away, there was probably a new family selfie being taken in front of a tree I wasn't invited to stand under. I just nodded. "Sounds nice," I said. Nice turned out to be an understatement, because 9 months later, when those Christmas texts came, another email was already sitting in my inbox. Subject line, "Island Staff and Friends Winter Block," from Elise, offering me 2 full weeks, free of charge, to use one of the smaller guest villas as I wished, as a thank you for bailing them out of a contract mess that would have cost them 6 figures. 2 weeks, on a private island, over Christmas. The same dates my family had just uninvited me from their living room. The universe, apparently, has a sense of humor. The group chat message arrived while I was still staring at Elise's email. "We've talked and decided." The wording made it sound like a corporate memo instead of a family decision. My mother had definitely written it. My brother and sister replied with heart emojis and "We'll miss you, sis," like they were consoling me for a scheduling conflict, not participating in an exile. I stood in my tiny kitchen, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, and felt this odd layering of lives. In one layer, I was the difficult daughter getting cut from Christmas because she ruined the mood. In another, I was the woman 2,000 miles away whose boss trusted her with a guest villa on an island people saved for years to visit. Both were true. Only one was killing me. I took a screenshot of the family text and sent it to Jenna. She responded immediately. "Wow, they really said you ruin the mood? That's a choice." Then, "So, island Christmas it is, right?" "Right." I opened Elisa's email again. "Leela, you've been a lifesaver this year. If you want to use one of the villas for your own holiday, consider this my gift. Bring friends, bring a book, bring whoever makes you feel at peace. Just let us know which dates." I scrolled back up to the family chat and reread the line about peace and mood. We really need a peaceful Christmas. We can't risk you ruining the mood again. It was funny, in a dark way. They had weaponized peace into another word for silence. What Elise was offering me was something completely different. Real quiet. No secrets buzzing under the surface. No forced cheer to keep my mother's Instagram feed on brand. I typed back to Elise. "Hi, Elise. Thank you so much. The December 22nd to January 3rd block would be perfect. I'll bring a small group of friends." Her reply came within minutes. "Done. Can't think of anyone who deserves it more." For a few days, I let those 2 realities sit side by side without touching. At work, I booked flights. I texted my closest friends with an invite that made them send back strings of exclamation points and disbelief. In the family chat, I responded to my mother's uninvitation with a simple, Okay, hope it's peaceful for you. She liked the message. Liked. As if this was a cooking video, not her daughter being told to stay away. I might have left it there. Might have just gone quietly to my island Christmas and let them keep believing whatever made sense to them. But then my sister posted a story complaining about people who bring drama and negativity and then act like victims when you set boundaries. And my mother commented with 3 clapping emojis. Something in me snapped. Not the part that wanted to hurt them. That part had been shouting for years. The part that finally got fed up with how false their version of events was. Because in their story, they were the ones protecting peace. In mine, I finally realized I didn't have to sit in their definition of it. 3 days before I flew out, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I created my own event. I started a new group chat, not with my family, with the same relatives who had called me privately after last Christmas to say, "You weren't wrong, you know. You just said what we're all thinking." With my 2 closest friends. With my cousin who had once confessed she dreaded holidays because of the tension. The chat was small. I named it Island Misfits as a joke. Then I dropped in 3 photos Elise had sent me of the villa. White walls, open deck, hammock, ocean stretching out like a promise. Change of Christmas plans, I wrote. Got uninvited for ruining the mood. Turns out I have a villa on a private island for 2 weeks. Anyone interested in a holiday where we don't have to pretend we're fine? There was a pause. Then the chat exploded. My cousin, "Are you serious? Jenna, this is the only Christmas invite I've ever wanted." An uncle I barely saw anymore, who had quietly left town years earlier. "I can swing flights. Tell me what to bring." It wasn't everyone. Most people stayed in the original group chat, liking my mother's decorating posts and ignoring the missing name on the invite list. But the people who did respond, they were exactly the ones I wanted around a table. For the first time, Christmas wasn't something being handed to me with conditions. It was something I was shaping. My family didn't know any of this yet. They thought they'd removed a problem. They were about to see the life that problem had built without them. The first sign that my quiet little rebellion was no longer quiet came from my sister. We were already on the island. The air was hot and soft, even in late December. The villa's sliding doors were open, letting in the sound of waves and the smell of someone else's barbecue from further down the beach. My friends were in the kitchen trying to decide if mimosa hour had a limit. My cousin was on the deck taking 100 pictures of the view. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting a work email. It was a direct message from Chloe. Where are you?" Attached was a screenshot of a photo my cousin had posted. Nothing wild. Just me on the deck in a sundress, hair pulled up, holding a mug, the ocean stretching out behind me. The caption read, "New favorite version of Christmas." I could feel the ripple in real time. Another buzz. From my mother in the family chat. "Is this a joke?" Then from my father. "Private island?" Someone had clearly clicked through to the resort's main page. I pictured them in the living room. Tree lit, table set, my empty chair visible in every reflection. And suddenly their image of punishing me by keeping me out, colliding with the reality of me under palm trees instead of their ceiling. I let the phone buzz for a minute while I poured myself another glass of orange juice. Jenna raised an eyebrow. "Trouble?" she asked. "Just ghosts," I said. When I finally answered my mother, I didn't apologize. I didn't explain like a teenager caught sneaking out. She had sent, "Did you run off with some stranger? This isn't safe." I replied, "I'm working with the resort owner. She invited me to use a villa for the holidays. I'm with friends and family. We're safe. Hope your Christmas is peaceful, like you wanted." There was a long gap. Then, "You didn't think to invite us?" The audacity of that made my jaw clench. "You uninvited me," I wrote back. "You said my presence ruined the mood. I didn't think you'd want to be anywhere near my negativity." The typing dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "The whole family is asking about you," she finally sent. "It looks extravagant. People are going to think we cut you off and you ended up fine." I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. That was the fear. Not that I was alone. Not that I was unhappy. That I was fine without them. I did end up fine, I wrote. And you did cut me off. You just did it politely. No response. On the deck, my cousin sat beside me. You okay? She asked. I laughed, a little choked. My mother is worried people will think I'm okay, I said. She snorted. She should be worried people will realize you were never the problem, she said. An hour later, my brother called. I didn't pick up. He texted instead. So, private island, huh? Could have used a heads up. Mom's freaking. I wrote back, you all decided you needed peace. I found mine. He replied with, you know she didn't mean it like that. I didn't bother answering. Because she did. She just never expected her words to line up so neatly with my options. That night, as the sun bled into the ocean and we sat around a table covered in grilled fish and plantains and a pie someone had managed to bake in the tiny oven, we took turns saying what we were grateful for. It was corny. It was perfect. Nobody lied. People said, I'm grateful nobody here is pretending everything is fine. I'm grateful for the first Christmas in years where I'm not waiting for a fight. I'm grateful Lila had the guts to leave. When it was my turn, I looked around at the faces glowing in candlelight, friends who had seen me cry on bathroom floors and still shown up, family members who had quietly carried their own scars from the house I'd been banned from. I'm grateful they uninvited me, I said. Everyone laughed, but I meant it. Because if they hadn't drawn that line so clearly, I might have brushed off Elisa's offer. I might have flown home and sat at a table, gritting my teeth, pretending I couldn't smell resentment under the pine-scented candles. Instead, I was on an island with people who didn't need me to ruin the mood for the truth to exist. If you've ever been cut out of a holiday because you refuse to play along with the lie, I want you to know this. Being uninvited hurts, but sometimes it also hands you back your freedom. You are allowed to use it. You are allowed to build a new table, even if it's temporary and sandy and held together with plastic chairs, especially then. Back home, the fallout simmered. When I landed in January, my phone was full of half-started conversations. My mother had sent a long message about appearances and family unity and how my public display on social media had made them look bad. I read it in my Lyft and then set my phone face down. Later, when I had unpacked and the silence in my apartment felt more like comfort than loneliness, I replied, I didn't post anything, I wrote. Our relatives did. They were happy. I'm not responsible for how you think that makes you look. She left the message on read. My father sent a shorter note. I didn't like how things went down, he wrote, but I'm glad you had a good Christmas. It wasn't an apology. It also wasn't blame. It was, weirdly, enough for that moment. Over the next few months, something shifted. A cousin asked if she could come work a season at the resort. An aunt called me for the first time in years, away from my mother's ears, and said, you know, after you weren't there, the tension didn't go away. It was just harder to pretend whose fault it was. My siblings retreated to familiar scripts. Chloe started posting more aggressively cheerful content, as if to prove nothing had changed. Mark joked about not getting an island invite whenever we did talk, like it was a punchline instead of a question. I drew my lines. I went home for a short weekend visit in the spring, stayed in a hotel, and made it clear I would leave the moment conversations turned into attacks. When my mother tried to bring up last Christmas, I said, we either talk about what actually happened or we don't talk about it at all. She changed the subject. That was fine, because here's the thing I learned sitting in that villa watching waves instead of wine glasses. You don't need your family to admit you were right for your reality to be true. You don't need to drag them to your side of the island. You just need to stop walking back to theirs every time they whistle. My relationship with my family didn't magically heal. Parts of it probably never will. But my relationship with myself did. I stopped believing that my sensitivity was a flaw. I stopped apologizing for noticing patterns. I stopped equating being invited to events with being loved. These days, Christmas looks different. Some years I go back to the island, sometimes alone, sometimes with rotating friends. Sometimes I stay in the city and host an orphan Christmas for people whose families are complicated. We eat too much, we tell the truth. We don't pretend the world is fine when it isn't. My mother still sends photos of her perfect tree. I sometimes heart them, I sometimes don't. What I don't do is beg. If you've been uninvited, cut out, or quietly pushed aside because you wouldn't play the role your family wrote for you, I hope my story lands where it needs to. I hope it reminds you that being thrown out of their version of peace might be the first step to finding your own. You are not the mood ruiner for saying this hurts. You are not the problem for refusing to drink the same denial. You are allowed to build a life where your presence is wanted, not tolerated. If stories like this make you feel a little less crazy, a little alone in the weird space between love and self-respect, stay with me. There are so many more. Next, I want to tell you about a woman whose parents skipped her wedding and then tried to move into the house she bought without them. She taught them very quietly that access is not the same as ownership. And if you've ever had someone act like they own your life just because they share your last name, you won't want to miss it.